up. What came over me? Who am I? It was wonderful. I loved every minute of it.
Sally Field, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, has always been known for her charm, talent, and sincerity. From Forrest Gump to Norma Ray and Steel Magnolias, she built a reputation as America's sweetheart, adored by audiences and respected by peers. But behind the bright smile and the humble persona, there was a side of Sally's Hollywood journey filled with tension, disappointment, and personal conflict, especially when it came to one man she could never bring herself to forgive. Over the decades, Field worked alongside some of the biggest names in entertainment. She had her share of friendships, rivalries, and unforgettable co-stars. Yet according to those closest to her, there was one figure in the industry who stirred deeper emotions than any other, a man she once admired but later grew to truly despise. Their relationship began with respect, even admiration, but quickly spiraled into a storm of mistrust, betrayal, and resentment that lingered for years. In interviews, Sally has always spoken candidly about her struggles in Hollywood, about being underestimated, typecast and dismissed early in her career. But when she finally found her voice, she didn't hold back about this particular person. Fans were shocked when Sally hinted at the deep-rooted animosity she carried, calling this man impossible, controlling, and the hardest person I ever had to work with. What could have gone so wrong between two Hollywood icons? Who was this man that left such a lasting mark on Sally Field's life and career? And how did their professional relationship turn into one of the most quietly bitter feuds in Hollywood history? Stay tuned, because the story behind Sally Field's long-held hatred is as dramatic, emotional, and revealing as any of her award-winning performances. Before the tension, before the resentment, there was admiration. When Sally Field first met Burt Reynolds, she saw him as one of Hollywood's brightest stars, confident, magnetic, and effortlessly charming. It was the late 1970s, and Reynolds was at the peak of his career. Smokey and the Bandit was a box office phenomenon, and Burt had become a symbol of masculine coolness. For Sally, who was trying to transition from television sweetheart to serious film actress, working with him was an exciting opportunity. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable. Fans instantly fell in love with the duo's fiery dynamic in Smokey and the Bandit, 1977, and it didn't take long for that spark to ignite off-screen as well. The two began a passionate relationship that was as intense as it was complicated. To the public, they were Hollywood's golden couple, glamorous, witty, and in love. But behind the cameras, their romance was far from easy. Burt Reynolds was a man used to control, in his career, his image, and his relationships. Sally, on the other hand, was beginning to find her independence. She was tired of being seen as the girl next door and wanted to prove her worth as a serious actress. Burt admired her drive, but he struggled with her rising fame. He wanted her by his side, yet often felt threatened when she took the spotlight. According to Sally, their relationship quickly became emotionally draining. Burt's charisma often masked his insecurity, and that insecurity turned into possessiveness. He wanted to control everything, even who I talked to, Sally would later reveal. Their love story, once romantic and exciting, began to feel suffocating. What started as admiration was now turning into frustration. Despite the tension, they continued to work together in films like Hooper and Smokey and The Bandit 2, but their off-screen struggles followed them on set. Crew members noticed the growing strain between them, whispered arguments, silent car rides, and awkward tension that often carried into their performances. For Sally, it was becoming clear that the man she once adored was no longer someone she could understand. When their relationship finally ended in the early 1980s, Sally felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. She later said that it took her years to recover from the emotional toll. While the world still saw Burt Reynolds as charming and larger than life, Sally saw the side that few ever did, controlling, jealous, and manipulative. Years later, when Burt published his memoir, he called Sally the love of my life, claiming that losing her was his biggest regret. But for Sally, those words didn't erase the pain. He hurt me more than anyone, she admitted in her own memoir. What the world thought was a great Hollywood romance was, for her, a lesson in heartbreak and survival. Their story is one of love, power, and control. Two people who cared deeply for each other, but were never truly compatible. For Sally Field, the experience would change the way she approached love, fame, and trust forever. By the time Smokey and the Bandit 2 was released in 1980, the once electric chemistry between Sally Field and Burt Reynolds had started to fade behind the scenes. What had begun as one of Hollywood's most passionate love affairs was slowly crumbling under the weight of pride, jealousy, and emotional exhaustion. Sally, who had fallen for Burt's confidence and charm, was beginning to see that beneath his bravado was a man haunted by insecurity. As Sally's career continued to rise, she started landing serious dramatic roles that challenged her as an actress, like Norma Ray, which earned her an Academy Award. While the world celebrated her achievement, Burt reportedly struggled with it. According to people close to them, he was proud of her success, but also deeply resentful of how quickly her star was rising. He wanted to be supportive, yet he couldn't help feeling overshadowed. Sally later revealed that Burt often tried to downplay her accomplishments, sometimes using humor or sarcasm to mask his discomfort. "He couldn't stand not being in control," she wrote. "If I got attention, he had to get more." What made it worse was that Burt's fame and his ego were constantly being fed by the public. He was Hollywood's biggest leading man, used to adoration and authority. The idea that the woman in his life might surpass him was something he couldn't easily accept. The relationship soon turned toxic. Sally described it as a cycle of love and anger, where tenderness could quickly turn into cold silence or cutting remarks. "He would belittle me, then apologize, then do it again," she said. It was exhausting. Those around her could see the emotional toll it was taking. Friends warned her that the relationship was unhealthy, but Sally kept hoping things would change. She genuinely loved Burt, but she was slowly realizing that love alone couldn't fix what was broken between them. On set, the tension became impossible to ignore. Burt, who was often playful and charming with crew members, would sometimes become distant or short-tempered when Sally was around. She began to dread working with him, fearing the unpredictable mood swings that had become part of their routine. "It was like walking on eggshells," she said. "I never knew which version of him I was going to get." Eventually, Sally made the difficult decision to end the relationship, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. She knew she had to step away before she lost herself completely. The breakup devastated Burt, but for Sally, it was the only way to regain her sense of independence and peace. Still, the wounds didn't heal easily. Years later, when Burt began speaking fondly of their relationship in interviews, calling her the one that got away, Sally felt conflicted. To the public, his words sounded romantic, like a man expressing regret for a lost love. But for Sally, they reopened old scars. "He may have loved me in his own way," she said, "but it wasn't a kind of love I could survive." When Burt passed away in 2018, Sally paid tribute to him, but her statement was careful, almost bittersweet. She called him a complicated man, someone who would always hold a place in her heart, but also someone who caused her deep pain. It was a graceful acknowledgement of their shared past, yet it made clear that her feelings toward him were far from simple. Their love story, once celebrated as one of Hollywood's most glamorous romances, had ended in emotional wreckage. What remained was a haunting mix of nostalgia and resentment, the memory of a man she once adored, but ultimately could not stand. After the breakup, Sally Field tried to move forward, but the shadow of Burt Reynolds lingered. She threw herself into her work, taking on roles that defined her as one of Hollywood's most talented actresses. From Places in the Heart to Steel Magnolias, she delivered performances that earned her critical acclaim and awards. Yet, behind her success, there was still a quiet sadness that few people saw. In interviews, Sally admitted that walking away from Burt had been one of the hardest choices of her life. She said she didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she couldn't keep sacrificing herself to make him happy. "He needed so much," she confessed. "So much attention, so much reassurance, and no matter how much I gave, it was never enough." Burt, on the other hand, took the breakup hard. Those close to him described him as a man haunted by regret. Despite dating other women, including high-profile stars, none of his relationships ever seemed to reach the same emotional depth as the one he had with Sally. He once said in an interview, "I miss her terribly. I think of her often. I was stupid, I hurt her, and I didn't mean to. But while Bert publicly mourned what he lost, Sally had to deal with the emotional scars he left behind." In her 2018 memoir In Pieces, she described their time together in painful detail, revealing that their relationship wasn't just difficult, it was damaging. She wrote that Bert was controlling, sometimes cruel, and emotionally manipulative. He demanded to be the center of everything, she said. If he wasn't, he'd make sure no one else could shine. Her revelations shocked fans who had always seen their romance as a Hollywood fairy tale. The truth was much darker. Sally recalled moments when Bert's temper frightened her, when he'd belittle her in private, and when she'd cry alone afterward, wondering why she stayed. "I was addicted to the drama," she admitted. "I thought if I just loved him more, he would change. But he never did." Even years later, when their paths occasionally crossed, there was an unspoken tension between them. Bert often tried to rekindle their connection, reaching out to her, sending her letters, or mentioning her fondly in interviews. But for Sally, it was too late. She had found peace in distance, even if a part of her still cared about him. When Bert grew older and his health began to decline, those who knew him said he often spoke about Sally with a mixture of affection and remorse. "She was the love of my life," he said in one of his final interviews. "I just didn't treat her the way she deserved." But by then, Sally had already closed that chapter. When Bert passed away in 2018 at the age of 82, Sally's reaction was deeply emotional but reserved. She released a short, heartfelt statement. "He will be in my history and my heart for as long as I live." It was a line filled with both love and pain, the kind that comes from someone who remembers both the beauty and the bruises of what once was. Behind closed doors, however, friends said the news hit her hard. It brought back memories she had spent years trying to bury. The laughter, the fights, the heartbreak. In one interview later, she said, "It was complicated. I loved him deeply, but I also had to save myself." Sally Field and Burt Reynolds' relationship remains one of Hollywood's most talked about romances. Not because of its glamour, but because of its raw humanity. It showed how love, when mixed with ego and insecurity, can become something destructive. She loved him, yes, but she also hated what that love did to her. Even decades later, when Sally speaks about those years, there's a tone of wistfulness in her voice, like she's still trying to reconcile the man she fell for with the pain he caused. It's a reminder that even in Hollywood, the brightest love stories can cast the darkest shadows. As the years passed, Sally Field found the strength to rebuild herself, piece by piece. After her turbulent love affair with Burt Reynolds, she poured her energy into her craft and her family. Acting became her therapy, a way to process emotions she couldn't yet put into words. Every role she played, from the resilient mother in Forrest Gump to the iron-willed matriarch in Brothers and Sisters, carried fragments of her real pain and recovery. In interviews, she often said that time was her greatest healer. "I had to forgive myself," she once reflected, "for staying too long, for loving too deeply, and for not seeing how much I was losing in the process." That admission came from decades of self-discovery, from learning that love doesn't always have to come with suffering. Her memoir, In Pieces, became not just a Hollywood tell-all, but a raw and courageous act of closure. Writing those pages allowed her to face memories she'd tried to suppress for decades. She didn't write it to hurt Bert's legacy, but to free herself from the weight of silence. "He was controlling in ways that broke me down," she wrote. "But I also have to own the part of me that allowed it to continue. Love blinded me. When the book came out, the public was divided. Some couldn't believe that the charming, quick-witted Burt Reynolds could be that man behind closed doors. Others praised Sally for her bravery. But for Sally, it wasn't about public opinion. It was about reclaiming her story. After Bert's death in 2018, reporters tried to get her to comment more deeply, hoping she'd share private details or unresolved feelings. But she chose grace over gossip. Her statement, "He will be in my history and my heart for as long as I live," said everything. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't denial. It was closure. The acknowledgement that love and pain can coexist, and that moving on doesn't mean forgetting. Behind the scenes, though, close friends said that the loss did affect her. No matter how complicated their history was, Bert had been a defining part of her life. He had loved her in his own flawed way, and she, in turn, had loved him despite the damage. But love, as Sally came to understand, isn't always meant to last. Sometimes, it's meant to teach. In the years since, Sally has become an advocate for emotional honesty and self-worth. She speaks openly about aging, identity, and the importance of setting boundaries, things she struggled with in her younger years. When she looks back on her time with Bert, she doesn't speak with anger anymore. Instead, there's a sense of bittersweet gratitude. "He taught me what love shouldn't cost," she said in one candid interview. Fans who grew up watching their on-screen chemistry in Smokey and the Bandit still hold onto the image of them as Hollywood's perfect couple. But Sally's story reminds everyone that what we see on camera rarely reflects the truth behind the curtain. The reality was messy, complicated, and deeply human. Today, Sally Field lives quietly, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She rarely steps into the spotlight unless it's for a project that truly matters to her. Her performances remain powerful, her words thoughtful, and her legacy undeniable. She's a symbol of endurance, of what it means to survive love that almost consumes you. And when she's asked if she still thinks about Bert, her answer is always tender, never vengeful. "He's a part of me," she once said softly. "How could he not be? But I've learned to remember him without pain." It's a simple statement, but it carries the weight of an entire lifetime. A woman who loved deeply, hurt deeply, and in the end, learned to let go. Sally Field's story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about healing. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from someone you can't stop loving. And for Sally, that truth became her freedom.